This is Cosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast.
So then Socrates says to Critias, well, very good. And what is this ancient famous action of which Critias spoke not as mere legend, but as veritable action?
Huh.
Yeah, of the Athenian state, which Solon recounted. Then Critias replies, I will tell an old world story, which I heard from an aged man. For Critias was, as I said at that time, nearly 90 years of age. Now, the day was that day of the Apaturia, which is called the registration of youth, at which, according to custom, our parents give prizes for recitations. And the poems of several poets were recited by us boys, and many of us sang the poems of Solon, which were new at the time, see? So that was his introduction. If Solon had only, like other poets, made poetry the business of his life, and had completed the tale which he brought with him from Egypt, which he didn't do. And when people read Critias, you'll discover that when the decision is going to be made to destroy the world and the gods get together for their conference, you're like, okay, now what happens? Boom, the tale ends right there. Yeah, it's a very frustrating. It's very frustrating. So then Socrates says, tell us the whole story and how and from whom Solon heard this veritable tradition. So once again, veritable meaning this true story.
Yeah.
See, so all throughout the narrative, it's emphasizing, no, this is veritable action. It actually happened. It's true, right? So you cannot, from the narrative itself, say, oh, well, no, it's just meant allegorically and not literally, because, the tale itself reinforces the idea that it is literal. So anyways, so when Solon goes to Egypt, I'm going to jump ahead a little in the story to get to kind of the essence of the thing here. So thither came Solon, who was received by them, that is the Egyptian priesthood, with great honor. And he asked the priests who were most skillful in such matters about antiquity, and made this discovery that neither he nor any other Hellene or Greek knew anything worth mentioning about the times of old. On one occasion, when he was drawing them on to speak of antiquity, he began to tell about the most ancient things in our part of the world, about Phronius, who was called the first. So this was kind of the Greek Adam, and about Niobe, and get this, and after the deluge, to tell of the lives of Deucalion and Pyrrha. And he traced the genealogy of their descendants and attempted to reckon how many years old were the events of which he was speaking, and to give dates. Thereupon, one of the priests, who was of a very great age, said, O Solon, you Hellenes are but children, and there is not an old man among you who is in a Hellene. Solon, hearing this, said, what do you mean? I mean to say, the old priest replied, that in mind you are all young. There is no old opinion handed down among you by ancient tradition, nor any science which is hoary with age. And I will tell you the reason for this. There have been, and will be again, many destructions of mankind arising out of many causes. The greatest have been brought about by the agencies of fire and water, and other lesser ones by innumerable other causes. Which reminds me of the old English proverb that says, fire and water have no mercy.
That is true.
And this is where it really begins to get interesting now. The old priest goes on to say, there is a story which even you have preserved, that once upon a time Phaeton, the son of Helios, having yoked the steeds of his father's chariot, but because he was not able to drive them in the path of his father, burned up all that was upon the earth, and was himself destroyed by a thunderbolt. Now, this has the form of a myth, but really it signifies a declination of the bodies moving around the earth, and a great conflagration of all things upon the earth recurring at long intervals of time. So he's laying it out right there, the declination of bodies basically orbiting in space around the earth.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and by invoking the myth of Phaeton is clearly an extraterrestrial encounter.
Right.
Inspired by
he's also making it clear that these mythical stories are meant to impart this knowledge, which is
yes.
Really, yeah.
Yes, and that's what he's saying here. Here's the story, and it has the form of a myth, but it's really talking about this astronomical phenomena.
That's right.
A declination of the bodies moving around the earth and in the heavens. I mean, it couldn't be more explicit than that.
Yeah.
And when we look at the definition of declination, we see that it can mean a bending or a sloping or a moving downward, a swerving or deviating.
Yeah, a decline.
Yeah,
a
decline.
Is that where it said at the regular interval? Was that in that quote also?
Long intervals of time.
There was something about a regular.
That quote is coming up a little later in the dialogue.
Sorry.
And then the fall of Phaeton. There's a great, if somebody wants to read the myth of the fall of Phaeton, Bullfinch's version is probably available online. It's easily accessible, and it's a very good retelling of the tale of I'll just do a couple of lines out of it. You know, the story behind Phaeton, he was the son of Helios, but didn't know he was the son. And then he was coming of age, and he asked his mother, he was in class, and everybody was bragging about their father. And he was upset because he didn't know who his father was. So he goes to his mother and convinces her to tell him about his father. And at that point, she says, that, your father is none other than the sun god. So then he resolves that he's going to go and find his father, which after arduous travels, he gets to the gates of the sun, and his father welcomes him and is overjoyed to see him. And among the Greek gods, while they are immune to most of the rules and restrictions that affect us mere mortals, and though they are basically immortal, nonetheless they are bound by certain restrictions. And one of those is that if a god makes a promise, he can't go back on it.
Right.
So Helios then is so glad to see Phaeton that he says, "I'll grant you any boon, anything you ask for." So then Phaeton says, "Well, okay, Dad, I want to drive your chariot." To which Helios goes, "Well, wait a minute. No, I meant anything but that. I mean, you can have anything else, not that, though, not that." And he goes and tries to talk Phaeton out of it.
Yeah.
Well, Phaeton is bound and determined. He's not going to give up. He wants to drive his dad's chariot, right? So Helios says, "Suppose I should lend you the chariot. What would you do? Could you keep your course while the sphere was revolving under you? Perhaps you think that there are forests and cities, the abodes of gods, and the palaces and temples on the way. On the contrary, the road is through the midst of frightful monsters. You pass by the horns of the bull, in front of the archer, and near the lion's jaws, and where the scorpion stretches its arms in one direction, the crab in another." So obviously he's describing the zodiac.
Yeah.
Says this is which is obviously the normal path of the sun. You're going through the sign of the zodiac. But finally he relinquishes. Phaeton gets in the chariot, starts driving it, and immediately the great steeds realize whoever's got these reins doesn't know what he's doing. Chariot spins out of control. Phaeton starts freaking out. Then Bullfinch's account goes on. He says, "When hapless Phaeton looked down upon the earth, now spreading in vast extent beneath him. He grew pale and his knees shook with terror. In spite of all the glare around him, the sight of his eyes grew dim. He wished he had never touched his father's horses, never learned his parentage, never prevailed in his request. He is borne along like a vessel that flies before a tempest, and when the pilot can do more and betakes himself to prayers, he turns his eyes from one direction to the other, now to the goal whence he began his course, now to the realms of sunset, which he is not destined to reach. He sees with terror the monstrous forms scattered over the surface of heaven. Here the scorpion extended his two great arms, with his tail and crooked claws stretching over two signs of the zodiac. When the boy beheld him, reeking with poison and menacing with his fangs, his courage failed, and the reins fell from his hands. The horses, when they felt them loose on their backs, dashed headlong and unrestrained went off into unknown regions of the sky, in among the stars, hurling the chariot over pathless places, now up into heaven, now down almost to earth. And this is a very intriguing, interesting line here. The moon saw with astonishment her brother's chariot running beneath her own.
Of course.
Sure. So what we've got here, the chariot is now a metaphor for the comet, the asteroid. I'm presuming it's, in this case, a comet, probably, passing within the orbit of the moon.
Right.
Right?
That's what it sounds like.
That's what it sounds like to me, yep. So then what happens once it gets inside the orbit of the moon? The clouds begin to smoke and the mountaintops take fire. The fields are parched with heat. The plants wither, the trees with their leafy branches burn, the harvest is ablaze. But these are small things. Great cities perished, with their walls and towers, whole nations with their people, consumed to ashes. The forest-clad mountains burned, with fires within and without, and Parnassus with his two peaks, and Rhodope forced at last to part with his snowy crown, right? So the glaciers have melted. Her cold climate was no protection to Scythia. Caucasus burned, and Ossa and Pindus, and greater than both, Olympus, the Alps, high in the air. Then Phaeton beheld the world on fire, and felt the heat intolerable. The air he breathed was like the air of a furnace and full of burning ashes, and the smoke was of a pitchy darkness. He dashed forward, he knew not whither. The Libyan desert was dried up to the condition in which it remains to this day. The nymph of the fountains with disheveled hair mourned their waters, nor were the rivers safe beneath their banks. The earth cracked open, and through the chinks light broke into Tartarus and frightened the king of shadows and his queen. The sea shrank up. Where before was water, it became a dry plain, and the mountains that lie beneath the waves lifted up their heads and became islands. The fishes sought the lowest depths, and the dolphins no longer ventured as to sport on the surface. Even Nereus and his wife Doris with their Nereids, their daughters, sought the deepest caves for refuge. Thrice Neptune essayed to raise his head above the surface, and thrice was driven back by the heat. Earth, surrounded as she was by waters, yet with head and shoulders bare, screening her face with her hand, looked up to heaven, and with a husky voice called on Jupiter, "O ruler of the gods, if I have deserved this treatment, and it is your will that I perish with fire, why withhold your thunderbolts? Let me at least fall by your hand. Is this the reward for my fertility of my obedient servants?" And it goes on with this entreaty to heaven. So then I'm jumping ahead. Thus spoke earth, and overcome with heat and thirst could say no more. Then Jupiter, omnipotent, calling to witness all the gods, including him who had lent the chariot, and showing them all that all was lost unless some speedy remedy were applied, mounted the lofty tower from whence he diffuses clouds over the earth and hurls his forked lightnings. But at that time not a cloud was to be found to interpose for a screen to earth, nor was a shower remaining unexhausted. He thundered, and brandishing a lightning bolt in his right hand, launched it against the charioteer, and struck him at that same moment from his seat and from existence. Phaeton, with his hair on fire, fell headlong like a shooting star, which marks the heavens with its brightness as it falls. And Eridanus, the great river, received him and cooled his burning frame. So there's right there, he brings in the metaphor, the long hair. The comet means long-haired, right? Like his hair on fire. He's a meteor shower, right? Which, of course, is the byproduct of a comet. And then, in variations of the myth, the sisters of Phaeton were the not the Pleiades, the who are the sisters? Sisters who?
The twins? I don't know.
No, sisters of Phaeton.
No, asking the wrong guys.
Oh, I thought you guys aren't accomplished classic scholars.
I know how to
Something about the flooding waters.
Yeah, because his sisters, the Phaeton's sister.
What's the part about the thunderbolt though? Like, I know that a thunderbolt was also what they would call sometimes an object coming in that was also called a thunderbolt.
I've always taken that to mean that it's the space debris itself. I mean, there's a whole thunderbolts now that I have to study into the dealing with the idea that they're electrical discharges, and there certainly are possible electrical discharges from objects entering the Earth's atmosphere. Here, it's basically Jupiter saves the Earth by hurling a thunderbolt and knocking this thing out. Right?
Wasn't there something with the Sphinx and how, I'm trying to remember the details on this, but there's an old Egyptian story that the Sphinx was hit by a thunderbolt and that one of the pharaohs came to see it later, implying that it was an actual object that had landed.
Oh, I'm not familiar with that story.
Okay, yeah, it's always is implied to be this.
Sorry, go ahead.
The Heliades, those were Phaeton's sisters. The Heliades.
Okay,
that's it. Heliades. So then, a variant on the story goes that his sisters, after his death, were so grief-stricken that they wept. And their tears then fell to earth and drowned the world in the great flood.
Oh, of course.
So in that variation, then there's this obviously a connection then between an object, this cosmic object setting the earth on fire, followed by a great flood, which is pretty much the scenario now that's emerged from studies of the Younger Dryas.
Yes.
Yeah.
Phaethusa and Limpedia.
Those are the Heliades?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. But I just read something else where it was like the tears of the daughters of Helios are amber.
Mm-hmm.
So they make jewelry out of the amber, and it's
yeah. That's an interesting twist, isn't it?
Yeah.
I have a screen share here to do Sebastiano in 1703. His painting here of the fall of Phaeton. Where is it? There it is.
So we're going through the myth of Phaeton because in Plato's dialogues, the old Egyptian priest referenced it when he was talking to Solon.
That's exactly right. And so this myth is actually the preface to the Atlantis story.
Right.
And that's why we are dwelling on it. And I think there's an important reason why Plato prefaced the story with the myth of Phaeton. I mean, I think he's right at the outset. He's wanting you to tie in the idea of a cosmic encounter with the idea of the destruction of Atlantis.
Is that Jupiter up there with his thunderbolt on the upper right?
Yeah, let's see. Let's get this. There we go.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, Jupiter hurling his thunderbolt, and you see Phaeton falling, the chariot here, the great steeds is plunging to earth.
Oh yeah.
Yep. But this one by Gustave Moreau I find to be really interesting. Check this
Yeah,
out.
I see. Yeah.
Notice here now,
Yep.
you've got the zodiacal wheel here, and there's the lion, obviously Leo, and we see the chariot plunging to earth, and we see a great dark serpent rising up from the earth,
Oh yeah.
which is an interesting detail. But then, almost as if to clinch it, look what you got here in the background.
Right. I saw that.
Yeah. Now, notice, cusp of Leo, 12,900 years ago.
Right.
That's the black mat layer date, right?
And it's also either the sunrise or the sun. That's the sun back there, isn't it?
That's the sun back there, I would
Yeah.
assume, yeah.
Yeah.
Unless it's the moon rising.
Could be the moon.
Could be the moon. But so you have the great dragon, you've got the lion, you've got the chariot, you've got the comet, all in this composition. So what did Gustave Moreau know?
Yeah.
Well, Gustave Moreau, interestingly, was very much studied into mythology, occult traditions. He was also well-versed in astronomy. So he was an artist that could have had access to more insider interpretations of some of the tales and myths. So, so then the priests go on after invoking the myth of Phaeton and the consequences of that kind of an event. They go on to say that when this happens, those who live upon the mountains and in dry and lofty places are more liable to destructions than those who dwell by rivers or on the seashore. And from this calamity, the Nile, who is our never-failing Savior, saves and delivers us. When, on the other hand, the gods purge the earth with a deluge of water, among you herdsmen and shepherds on the mountains are the survivors, whereas those of you who live in cities are carried by the rivers into the sea. The fact is that wherever the extremity of winter frost or of summer sun does not prevent, the human race is always increasing at times, and at other times diminishing in numbers. And whatever happened, either in your country or in ours, or in any other region of which we are informed, if any action which is noble or great or in any other way remarkable has taken place, all that has been written down of old and is preserved in our temples, whereas you and other nations are just being provided with letters and other things. But then, at the usual period, the stream from heaven descends like a pestilence and leaves only those of you who are destitute of letters and education, and thus you have to begin all over again as children and know nothing of what happened in ancient times, either among us or among yourselves. So he finishes up by saying, as for those genealogies which of yours, remember again, this is the old priest talking to Solon.
Right.
As for those genealogies of yours which you have recounted to us, Solon, they are no better than the tales of children. For in the first place, you remember one deluge only, whereas there were many of them. So,
Wow.
and in the next place, you do not know that there dwelt in your land the fairest and noblest race of men which ever lived, of whom you and your whole city are but a seed or a remnant. And this was unknown to you, because for many generations the survivors of that destruction died and made no sign.
Meaning they didn't
Yeah.
write? Is that what they meant? Or
Right. Right. Yep.
Slide 72. We're gonna have to wrap it up on slide 72 here.
He's telling a lot more than just the fall of one, city, one
Yeah.
Atlantis. I
Yeah.
mean,
A destruction of the
So
whole
it's like-
world. And
it many times over.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he's saying that like the idea of the civilization of Atlantis in the middle of the Atlantic, but this ancient priest, this old priest of Egypt, is saying that there was a civilization where you guys live
Yeah.
you don't even remember the Athenians or whatever he was referring them to. Yeah.
Yes. I always refer to them as the proto-Athenians.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, these two dialogues are really rich,
Yes.
and you can see why I've been encouraging people for years to read them.
Well, you just keep reading it to us, and then by the time we get done with it, we'll have read them. Great. Just give us the Carlson reading of the Timaeus and Critias dialogues. It'll be awesome.
Yeah. So then the priests go on to tell Solon that before the greatest deluge, that there had been a city where now Athens is, and he says it was preeminent for the excellence of her laws, and is said to have performed the noblest deeds, and to have had the fairest constitution of any which tradition tells under the face of heaven. Solon marveled at this and earnestly requested the priest to inform him exactly and in order about these former citizens. To which the priest replied, "You are welcome to hear about them, Solon," said the priest, "both for your own sake and for that of the city, and above all for the sake of the goddess, who is the common patron and protector and educator of both our cities. She founded your city 1,000 years before ours, receiving from the earth and Hephaestus the seed of your race. And then she founded ours, the constitution of which is set down in our sacred registers as 8,000 years old. As touching upon the citizens of 9,000 years ago, I will briefly inform you of their laws and the noblest of their actions, and the exact particulars of the whole we will hereafter go through at our leisures in the sacred registers themselves." A lot of interesting stuff there. Yeah. Obviously, here he actually first gives the date. And here was this, this fair civilization in, pre-antediluvian Greece. Okay, that's what we're talking about, before this great flood, right? And he's putting this date at 9,000 years. See, so we're going from the time of Solon's sojourn in Egypt, 600 BC, to then, what you can do the math. We're in round numbers, 11,600 years is where Plato is placing his story, which is now exactly the date that is given for the transition from the Pleistocene to the Holocene, and the beginning of the Younger Dryas from 12,900 to the end of the Younger Dryas at 11,600. And the end of the Younger Dryas then is one of the things that happened at the end of the Younger Dryas is one of the great meltwater pulses discharged into the global ocean from the rapidly melting ice sheets.
And that's when she founds the second city, which is ancient Egypt, right?
Egypt was founded 1,000 years later.
Right. So after that cataclysmic period, then they found
maybe 1,000 years later. So that puts it at like 10,600 years ago.
Right at the climatic optimum.
Yeah, and so you've got a millennium there for things to settle down, basically. And Yep.
Can you imagine if there was a place where you could go today where there'd be some old priest who'd be like, "Yeah, sure, sit down. I'll tell you all the stories of these ancient places that we have been handed to." God, that would be freaking awesome.
Well, yeah. You know what I want is the sacred registers.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
We can go through at our leisure in the sacred registers.
God.
Selves. See, man, where are those sacred registers? Man, let me just have a peek.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Sphinx.
Yeah. Just let me know they're there. Yeah. They got to be somewhere. They made metal libraries of that stuff and stashed it in places.
Yep.
I'm sure there are repositories. There's all the legends of repositories of ancient knowledge.
I'm just, I'm keeping my fingers crossed and thinking positive that at some point in my lifetime, there's going to be discovery made. Some cache of ancient stuff.
Yeah. It
from
won't be suppressed. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So now in the narrative, we've skipped over a few parts, but now in the narrative, it comes to the subject of Atlantis itself. Right?
Yeah. We're
Here's,
getting close to wrapping it up here, so just letting you know. I think Mike's got to go.
okay. Well,
I'm gonna-
we'll do this because then it'll bring it back to Atlantis, and then this is where we can pick it up.
Okay,
All right.
good deal.
See you later, Mike.
Bye, Mike.
Mr. Man.
Adios, Mike. Okay, so here's the priest. Many great and wonderful deeds are recorded of your state in our histories, but one of them exceeds all the rest in greatness and valor. For these histories tell of a mighty power which was aggressing wantonly against the whole of Europe and Asia, and to which your city put an end. This power came forth out of the Atlantic Ocean. For in those days the Atlantic was navigable, and there was an island situated in front of the straits, which you call the columns of Heracles, and was the way to other islands. And from these islands, you might pass to the whole of the opposite continent, which surrounded the true ocean. For this sea, which is within the straits of Heracles, is only a harbor, having a narrow entrance, but that other is the real sea, and the surrounding land may be most truly called a continent. Interestingly, what he's describing, so from the pillars of Heracles, you come to some islands. Beyond those islands are more islands, and then beyond that, as he says,
There's a continent that's
the whole of the opposite continent.
which is talking about.
Well, what else could it be talking about?
That's right.
Right? He says, sail west from the pillars of Hercules. You're going to come to some islands, then you're going to come to some more islands, and then you're going to come to the opposite continent beyond.
And then doesn't it also say that on the other side of that continent is the real ocean, basically saying the Pacific, which is enormous?
No, he's talking about the real ocean being what's outside the pillars of Hercules.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And he's saying that the Mediterranean is only a harbor.
Okay, I got you. All right.
That's what he's saying. Yeah. So if we look here, I'll pull up some maps and do a share screen here. Let's see if this is a good one. Yeah, this is a great one. Okay. So I am going to do a share screen here so we can look at, this has got a digital elevation of the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Are we there?
See it. Yep.
I got it.
All right. Excellent. All right. So over here on the right, with my cursor, that's the Pillars of Hercules right there. And if you come out from the Pillars of Hercules, you come to a group of islands right here, of which Madeira is the most prominent. And during the Ice Age, with lowered sea levels, these islands would have been more abundant and more prominent. Then you go beyond those islands and you come to more islands here, which are the Azores, right?
Yeah.
Then you go from those islands on and you come to the continent beyond.
Right.
So, I mean, what his geography fits perfectly with what's there.
Yeah.
Now, coincidence, maybe he didn't know what he was talking about. Maybe he made it up, whatever. But the point is his geography fits perfectly.
What was the reference to that this ocean was navigable in those days? What did that mean? That he was implying that it's not navigable at the time of the telling?
I presume that's one of the things that's a little bit difficult to interpret exactly what he meant.
Okay.
Well, maybe
yeah.
I'm just thinking
With
that
the
if
sea
there were
levels lower
more,
and the-
if there were more islands and there was more land sticking out, it would have been easier for them to do the island hopping.
Yeah. And presumably the Pacific, the ocean gyre would have been different to when the sea levels were way lower. So I don't know.
Mhm.
That would have changed the navigational properties of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it would have. Of course, what we now know is that there is evidence of major underwater catastrophes that date back to this period.
Yeah.
So there would have been a time when, the ocean there was really stirred up.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Still screen sharing there.
he's scrolling. I think we can wrap it
Look at
up there,
all the
man.
slides.
I know we've got so many slides. It's gonna be great.
Yeah, this is we'll begin into this. This is the evidence for these enormous underwater cataclysms. Just like basically whole flanks of islands falling into the ocean.
Oh man.
Okay.
Preview, folks.
Yeah,
Stay
so
tuned.
we'll be coming back to that. So I'm going to stop share for now.
We just started.
So
Awesome.
kind of what we've done here in the last couple of episodes is set the groundwork for a further discussion of Atlantis. So that now the question becomes, is it possible that there is a sunken landmass in that area? Or is that completely out of the question?
Right.
And if it's completely out of the question, then we can presume, I think, safely that, Plato meant the story allegorically. But so far, what we're seeing is very interesting because there are just too many coincidental connections here. The timing, to me, is intriguing. Could be a coincidence, 11,600, when a great meltwater pulse was introduced into the North Atlantic, and that's Plato's date, after which immediately Atlantis sinks, right? Is it physically possible for a landmass to subside? Well, that becomes the sort of the question. That sort of is a question for geology and geophysics. But what we'll do is we'll look at the actual evidence.
Yeah.
And look, is there empirical evidence for any subsidence in the mid-Atlantic? And what do you think the answer would be? Well,
Are you asking us now?
There
Well,
it is.
That is the question.
That is the
folks.
question we will be asking in future episodes. Stay tuned.
So to kind of wrap it up, what we found is that Plato initiates his tale with this by referencing the myth of Phaeton. So we've kind of found out now what the myth of Phaeton is all about, which is highly, highly suggestive of some kind of an encounter between Earth and likely a cometary mass that could have triggered, cataclysms, could have triggered both floods and fires. We know from, and we will be talking about this in future podcasts, of course, the evidence surrounding the Younger Dryas, which gets more interesting all the time.
Yes.
And definitely is relevant to a story of Atlantis. And so we discussed the date, meltwater pulse 1b, 11,600, coincides with Plato's date for Atlantis, the subsidence of Atlantis, or immediately after, because 11,600 was kind of the conclusion of this great war between the Atlanteans and the Proto-Athenians, and it was immediately subsequent to that war that there was this tremendous catastrophe. And we'll get to those quotes, but it also mentions that there was a huge erosive event on the Greek peninsula that was happening simultaneous with the subsidence of this landmass in the mid-Atlantic. So clearly now that expands the scope of the phenomena considerably.
Something to be investigated.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
See what happens when you do your homework for 40 years?
That's
Woo,
awesome.
You dig up a lot of great stuff.
Yeah, but it's fun.
It's cool.
Yeah, it is.
It's
It's
I
astounding.
can't think of anything more fun than exploring ancient mysteries.
That's right. That's what we're dedicated
Totally
to.
agree with that.
And then telling people about it.
Yeah, and then going out to
Piquing
visit
their
places.
interest.
Yeah. Yep,
Yeah.
going out on field investigations, but also just like showing up at a party and having cool stuff to talk about.
Yeah.
So check out these pyramids, guys. It's a lot of fun.
Well, I mean, the main reason we do this is to impress people, right?
That's right. We want people to think we're cool. So we
Yeah,
try
that's-
to learn a bunch of stuff about ancient stuff and talk about it.
That's definitely why I do it.
It works.
I mean, you're looking at Coolsville, guys.
That's it. That's what it's all about.
Kosmographia.
All right. Bradley, help me out with the websites here. What do we got? We got Kosmographia.com. None of these are completely built yet, but they will be coming. So by the time all this stuff is going to get posted, they should be up and running. So Kosmographia.com. We
With
also
a K.
Yes,
That's
with
right,
a
with
K,
a
that's
K.
right.
We also have randallcarlson.net, which will be the hub or the launching page for all of the sort of Randall Carlson associated sites.
Yes, in the works.
Right. So the email for the podcast, guys, where you can get a hold of us is Kosmographia1618@gmail.com. So the first task is you guys send us emails about what you think that number is, and we'll see if anybody gets it right. Also, Twitter, we have @Kosmographia. Isn't that right? With a K?
That's correct.
That's the handle, Twitter
Straight
handle.
up. Yep.
Okay. So guys, don't forget to share the shows wherever you can share the shows. Get on Facebook, share it on Facebook, share it on Instagram, share it on Twitter, wherever you can share the shows. Also,
Share it on cassette.
mixtapes. Burn CDs of it. Also, don't forget to give us reviews. Any reviews especially on iTunes helps a lot with spreading the show. So we want to get this out to as many people as possible. And obviously, Randall Carlson's content is always top notch. So it shouldn't be hard to get people to look at it. But any reviews you give on iTunes will help. And also, if you give a good review and you write something, we might read it on the show and comment on what you said. So that's one way to get a hold of us. We'll definitely look at the reviews. We're also going to have ways to donate for the show. We're building a Patreon, and there is going to be just a regular PayPal one-time donation button. We're going to get all that worked out. I'm just letting you know, if you want to donate, that would help us a lot. Doing this stuff isn't free. So getting some donations coming in so we can get better equipment, so we can get better software to do better screen sharing and video podcasting would be great. So don't forget to do all that stuff. And I think that's it.
Thanks a lot, everybody.
That's a wrap.
Thank you, Randall.
Just scratching the
Thanks, guys.
surface.
It was again, it was fun.
Yep. That was a blast. Good night, everybody. Don't forget to do your homework. Read
Kosmographia.
Kosmographia podcast. Ragazzi. All right. Good job.